In this segment, we'll be looking at Nazi ideology or Nazi ways of thinking. Please remember to look on edmodo.com for any assignments you have, to go on my website for any notes that you may need, and to follow along with YouTube for any videos that you may have missed. Let's talk about how the Nazis' ideology, their way of thinking, leads to one of the worst moments in history, the genocide that's known as the Holocaust. Nazis believed, and they get a lot of their beliefs from Hitler's book Mein Kampf. They believed that they were part of a master race known as the Aryans, and they kind of falsely believe this because who are the Aryans originally? They're actually kind of like a Indo-European, a kind of Middle Eastern, if you will type people. So what the stereotypically the Aryans that the Germans associated were tall, white, fair-skinned, blonde, blue-eyed, this kind of perfection that they were seeking. And because they believed that they were part of that, or they were that, they felt that all other races were inferior or less than them, and that they needed to be eliminated off the face of the earth to some degree. So, how did they get this way? From Hitler and Mein Kampf. Hitler and Mein Kampf, and then the Nazis who follow Hitler, blamed the Jews for a lot of problems that Germany encountered following World War I. They blamed the Jews for the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, for the Weimar Republic, and for the economic collapse that happened following World War I. And other groups are locked into this, like gypsies and Poles, people from Poland, and the disabled and homosexuals, because they were seen as inferior and less than. And this starts to spread throughout the country. And it made targeting Jews kind of public policy. And one example of this is something called the Nuremberg Laws. And the Nuremberg Laws were enacted in 1935, and it deprived Jews of German citizenship. They were no longer citizens of Germany. It forbid marriage between Jews and non-Jews, and later it would limit what jobs they could have and could not have. It basically controlled Jewish way of life in Germany and targeted them and made them persecuted in Germany. And the world will know about a lot of this stuff, but the world really won't know about the Holocaust until we happen upon it during the war. Other policies that they had, they initially tried to get the Jews out of Nazi-occupied areas, to force them to leave, and some do. There's some very famous Germans that travel to other places of Europe, that travel to America, that travel even to South America and Mexico. But not all Jews were able to do those things, could afford it, or had the means to. And certainly not all Jews wanted to leave their homes. And we're not going to stand for the Nazis doing that. And so they stayed. And what the Nazis started to do was to isolate Jews in segregated areas. And these segregated areas were called ghettos. And that's a Polish word that basically means to separate. And so that became the term for these separate areas that they were put in, these ghettos, and it's called ghettoization. There, they were forced to live in horrible conditions. You take one family living in an apartment-type home, and now you may have 5, 6, 8 families living in that same place. And Hitler hoped to have them encounter disease, and he wanted them to suffer and to die from this. Now, once this doesn't happen, Hitler starts using Jews and these other groups of people for work camps. And having tired of them being around, he will send them to work camps, or he'll send them to basically execution right then, or to death camps later on. And that's how the Holocaust began. And the Holocaust is a genocide. And a genocide is a systematic killing of a group of people. And here the group of people were those inferior races that the Germans believed were, literally they referred to them as a virus, something that needed to be eliminated. And these groups included Russians, people from Poland, gypsies, it included homosexuals, the disabled, and of course it included the most devastated group from the Holocaust, the Jewish population. The groups were either placed in these extermination camps or forced to work in these labor camps. And the conditions were just horrible. Working nonstop, fed almost nothing, water hardly, and if you were weak, you were killed. The Germans and the Nazis became very efficient at what they did. They tattooed numbers on their workers, on these basically slaves, to keep track of. In fact, that's how we know why so many people died. Over 13 million, over 6 million Jews from this, um, because they kept track of it. They were well organized. Um, the horror of this of gas chambers, when bullets became ineffective, they were not efficient. They finally started putting groups of people in gas chambers because it was more efficient. And then they would cremate them. And then they realized, why go to the trouble of gassing them only to cremate them and start burning people alive? And you should really look into, there's some great books. One is by Elie Wiesel. It's called Night. And if you haven't read that, you need to read that and get an understanding of what happened, because a lot of people in the world believe that this did not happen. And we know, we are certain, we have witnessed it, that it did happen. And you should know from it, and we should learn from it. One thing I want you to do is to look and find some different resources that talk about the Holocaust. The Anne Frank Museum, you can find a website for that. You can also go to different websites dealing with the Holocaust Museum. But as you know, there's plenty of resources out there to see what it was like. There's a great television series called Band of Brothers, produced by Steven Spielberg. And it follows a group of American soldiers, and through their fight throughout the entire war that they were a part of. And there's in particular one uh, segment of the series, and it's called Why We Fight. If you go to YouTube and you punch in this title right here, Band of Brothers Concentration Camp, you'll come up with a scene from it that shows a soldier running back to his commander, to his major, and telling him, we found something, we don't know what it is. And from there, if you watch this first one right here, you can get an idea of what it's like. It's fairly graphic, but it's real, based on the encounters that the real soldiers and people involved in these camps saw, and what they were a part of. So I encourage you to watch that. Once you finish these notes, make sure you're keeping up with your assignments on Edmodo, that you're keeping up with all the other notes on YouTube, and that you're keeping up with anything that you need on my website.